Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hot Topics, an opportunity where Open New York members get to talk about everything and anything pro-housing. My name is Bobbi Barnett. I am a member leader within Open New York. I'm a New York resident and a member of Manhattan Community Board 4. I like to use my voice to advocate for more housing here in New York City. I'm going to hand it over to Austin to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Austin. I am an Upper West Side resident. I'm also a rising junior at New York University, studying urban design, architectural studies, and journalism as well. And I am also an Open New York member. I've been a member for about a year. And I have a really deep interest in urban issues and New York politics. And I like using my studies and my work to try and advocate for more housing and other urbanist issues across the city.
Thanks, Austin. How about you, Jesse?
Sure. I'm Jesse. I have also been a member of Open New York for about a year, like Austin. I live in Inwood in Manhattan, and I've lived in New York City for about 7 years, but I've kind of bounced around between a lot of different neighborhoods, partly out of seeking affordable housing myself, but I'm happy to be talking to you all tonight.
And Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. I've been a member of Open New York for about 5 years, and I recently moved to Astoria. I got into this because I love cities and I love living in them, and I want more people to be able to do so if they want to. And right now they can't. So it's exciting to get to share some of what I've learned over the past couple of years of doing housing advocacy and share that with the world.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks, everybody. So this session, we're going to cover the ULURP process. Let's get back to basics. Jesse, could you let me know what ULURP stands for and give us a little bit of background?
Sure, yeah. So ULURP, the acronym stands for Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. And this is a process that was mandated in 1975. There was a New York City charter change. And essentially this change was made really in response to a lot of the changes that Robert Moses had been making in New York City. For anybody who doesn't know who Robert Moses was, he was sort of an urban planner who made a lot of changes to a lot of different communities throughout New York City, and sort of had like unilateral power to do so. And so ULURP was a process that was designed to give power to community boards to have a say in that process. And the intent was to make it more participatory and a more democratic process for local communities. And fun fact, originally the acronym was going to be Standard Land Use Review Procedure, which spells out SLURP, but I think that was a little bit unpalatable for some, so now we have ULURP.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jesse, for that introduction. I think one of the most defining features of ULURP is the sort of timeline that it sets for land use changes. Dan, could you give us a little bit more information on how long it actually takes for a ULURP application to get approved?
Sure. So ULURP is from end to end can take up to 7 months. It's a multi-step process. It's important to understand. It starts when a proposed land use change is received and certified by the Department of City Planning. Then it goes to the local community board or boards that oversee the area for 60 days of review. They'll usually have a meeting with first like a committee meeting, like the land use committee, and then the full board will vote on a resolution that kind of expresses the sentiment of the board towards that application. After the community board weighs in, and that is non-binding, by the way, so you might have to show up just to kind of wave the flag, but even if the community board votes no, that does not spell the end of a project necessarily. So after the community board weighs in, then it goes to the borough president for his or her review. The borough president, the community board gets 60 days. Then on top of that, the borough president gets 30 days. After that, the City Planning Commission reviews the application. They get an additional 60 days. And then the city council takes like an actual binding vote on the thing. And this is the vote that actually matters. The city council has up to 50 days to act after the city planning commission. Then the mayor can review it and veto it. He only has a couple days he or she has only a couple days to do that. So overall, the process can take up to 7 months. It can move a little faster sometimes if like various actors overlap their periods of comment a bit. But most of the time that.
All right, it looks like Dan froze. Sorry about that, folks. But good news, Dan had mostly covered the overall ULURP process, and we'll await him to rejoin us. But in the meantime, let's kind of backtrack and talk a little bit more about that process. So when the developer or a developer files an application with the Department of City Planning, how long does it take for the public to find out about that application?
So do you want me to jump in, or were you asking?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
I lost my connection there.
No, it's okay. And you're also, I can't tell. There's some screen.
Yeah, Dan, you have some like color issues, but we can probably move past that.
Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Yeah.
While he figures that out, I can jump in on that question. So yeah, so
how much of my speech did you all get?
We got pretty much everything, all the important parts. So you cut out a almost perfect time. Could have used maybe 4 or 5 more words, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we got the really important information and a lot of really interesting details as well. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like when the public can find out, it kind of depends on how invested in the process a member of the public is. When a developer actually submits the application to the Department of City Planning that kicks off the process, that's part of public record right from the start. But then as it kind of moves through the whole process that Dan described, it kind of depends on like if you are really tuned in to what your community board is discussing, if you follow your community board or maybe local city council member on social media, or get newsletters from them, then those are all kind of ways that people find out about it. But I would think that most people, depending on how controversial and how much attention a project is getting, it seems like most people tend to find out during the community board process.
And I think one thing that you can definitely add to this is also who you see at these community board, borough president, and city planning commission meetings. In my experience, at least, a lot of these are in favor and in opposition of any given projects. They are from organizations and certain groups and even labor unions. 32BJ is very prominent at City Planning Commission hearings, especially when it comes to larger commercial developments. They were one of the biggest proponents of 175 Park Avenue, which went into the ULURP process last year and passed. And then you have conservancy groups that were testifying against the Gowanus rezoning through the summer and into November. So there's a lot of organization that happens around testimonials for these hearings. But particularly it would be of great advantage for people to get into some of these groups to become more informed about these projects. But definitely you can testify on your own. You don't have to be a part of an organization to have like a worthwhile testimony or a worthwhile contribution to the process. But most of these organizations are going to have a little bit of a leg up when it comes to getting ahead of the process.
I think both of those are really worthwhile, important answers to kind of pay attention to the local orgs and the community board. The only thing that I would add about the ULURP process is that application and pre-certification, that where a developer or another party, could even be the city, goes to city planning. That process isn't legally mandated to take any amount of time. After 6 months, a community board can actually step in and say, hey, please certify this. We need to talk about it. But if there are staffing issues at city planning, we've seen staffing issues throughout the agency, or city planning is taking its sweet time for whatever reason, sometimes these things can take a little while, which is why it can be really valuable to have not only the community board, but these community groups who are really paying attention, talking to the developer, talking to city planning to kind of hear about what's happening. So I think that's super helpful. I have another question for you guys. So we've talked about the process. Do applications typically get approved? And what are some reasons why an application might not be approved? We can start with Jesse.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, there are many reasons why an application might not get approved, and you know, as Dan had said, ultimately the real deciding vote that is probably the most impactful in the process is the city council vote on a project. Although Dan did mention that the mayor can veto it, but I think that, you know, one thing that we hear about a lot is something that is referred to as member deference, which is that oftentimes the entire city council, or at least the majority of the city council, will defer to the local city council member or members that are in the district or closest to the district that the project is actually proposed for. And if that city council member doesn't like something about the project, or the developer didn't meet their expectations or kind of negotiation throughout the process. For example, one big reason why a local city council member might not approve is because a project didn't contain as much affordable housing as they would have liked to see. Then that member tends to be really enormously impactful in terms of how many other city council members will vote. And so I think that that's, you know, for a lot of projects that we've seen that don't pass, and then ultimately, you know, the site might end up with as of right development, which you can get into a little bit more, then those are often just because people are deferring to kind of the local council member, who is of course often swayed by their own constituents and their own community board.
Yeah, I just want to add to that like in terms of do things usually pass this, it's important to remember that we only see the applications that developers or the city actually choose to make. So if a developer like would like to build a project on a given site, but like just judges that there's no way that a particular zoning change would succeed in the ULURP process, they just won't bother to try. So there's probably a lot of projects that are being stopped by zoning that we'll never see because like they never make it off the drawing board.
Yeah, and actually, even to add to that as well, there are a number of projects that kind of make it through that like preliminary application phase and are somewhere in the community board process, but because of the desires of the community board or the local city council member, those parties might be asking for things that the developer is just not able to make happen. Like, you know, sometimes they might be asking for as much as 100% affordable housing, and the developer and and, you know, site owner, they have certain return on investment that they need to make that is sort of in their own considerations that they need to kind of adhere to, because they have stakeholders as well. And so they might actually pull out of a project before it even makes it to a city council vote, even if it had been submitted at some point.
A great point. I was hoping, Austin, could you tell us a little bit more about who actually makes that final say, though, after it goes through all of these processes? What decides whether or not a ULURP gets certified?
Well, I mean, you obviously have the two binding decisions in the City Planning Commission and the City Council, but the person with the last say is obviously the mayor. Usually the mayor doesn't go against what the City Council says, especially if they veto a project. He can't just come around and say, you know what, hey, I'm just gonna approve it myself. So really his only vote is to say veto something that they've approved, which would then send it back to the City Council, and if they have a supermajority, then the mayoral veto is overridden. But more often than not, like 90% of the time, the mayor just goes along with any approval that the City Council goes through. So in layman's terms, if it makes it through the City Council, it's gonna make it to the mayor's desk and the mayor is gonna approve it himself. Like the Soho rezoning was 43-5 back in December. The mayor signed it not that long after, about a week later, if even that much longer. But the main hurdles for any approval would be the City Planning Commission, which rarely ever, but can veto projects like 960 Franklin back in September. They came up with climatological reasons as the development was not responsible enough, or the City Council will probably vote against it. But if it makes it through the City Council and it makes it through the City Planning Commission, the mayor has the last say, but the mayor is not going to really change much if it makes it to him.
That is super helpful, Austin. One thing I did want to add that I think we talked about earlier was just mention member deference. Does member deference, could you talk a little bit more about that and the impact it has on whether or not a rezoning passes?
Sure, I could add on a little bit. So like member deference, as was briefly mentioned, is pretty much this idea is like whoever's city council district the project resides in, they have a huge sway in how the project goes and whether or not the approval goes. If they do not support the project, it is incredibly likely that the project will not go forward. And if they do support it, it's almost a certainty that it will go forward. So one prominent example I can think of is in 2018. With member deference, you're also going to have a lot more engagement with this project. And there's this development in downtown Brooklyn, 80 Flatbush. And Stephen Levin, the council member at the time, was very on the fence about the development. He wanted a height cut. And I remember he was working with the developers, Alloy, up until pretty much the last possible second to come up with a plan that he could approve of. And when it got his vote, when it got his stamp of approval, it made it through the city council with flying colors. I think it was a unanimous vote. And you can also invoke the Soho NoHo rezoning too. Carolina Rivera and Margaret Chin released a statement in July, August saying that they wanted to get the rezoning through, but as it stood, they could not approve it. So they were very deeply involved with the process of making last minute changes and revisions. And when it got their stamp of approval, as we already know, it passed 43-5. Now, there are a few exceptions. I think the most prominent, the most recent exception would be the New York Blood Center on the Upper East Side. Ben Kalos was vehemently in opposition to the plan, and he was a surefire no vote, but it got passed anyway. And this was one of the first instances of member deference being pushed by the wayside. He got a super majority vote against him, and the Blood Center is slated to go through. Another close example of this was also Industry City back in 2020. Carlos Menchaca, the city council member at the time, was also deeply in opposition to the plan, but the city council was seriously considering going against him and approving the plan to remodel Industry City as a more commercial mixed-use facility and bring it up to date. The only reason that it did not go through is that other higher-ups in state and federal office signed a joint letter urging the council to vote no on the project, which led the developer to essentially pull its application altogether, which is something that they can do. If they feel that it's not going to gain traction, if it's not going to get anywhere, they can pull their application and just go with an as of right development or just not do anything at all, which we have seen a couple times in the past. I think one example was in 2019 with Lenox Terrace. Olnick had a huge plan to develop 5 new towers in that complex with affordable housing and was vehemently opposed. And they ended up pulling their plan because they thought that the opposition was not going to budge. So they just went with an as of right option.
That's a fantastic answer, history lesson. You can see just how complex the different players are there, but also how much relative power the very local offices have, whether it be the community board or the city council member, in weighing in on what actually gets through. So I'm hoping we can move to our final question, which is just why do we even care about this? Why is this important for New Yorkers to understand? And let's do a round robin. We want to get everybody in here. Jesse, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I can get started. I mean, I think that there are a lot of reasons. You know, we described that this is a really complicated process, but that it's also a process that involves some sort of participatory government, or there is at least the opportunity for that. I think that for me, when I think about this and like how I feel about ULURP as a whole, I think that something that has really stood out to me when learning about this procedure and kind of what, who is actually involved, has really been to learn that the people who often have a voice at the table are not necessarily representative of the community. Oftentimes it's homeowners, it might be retired folks who, certainly have an interest in having the community be the way that they want it, and making, kind of having a voice in shaping the community. But there are other people who live in the community who may be underrepresented because they don't have time to attend these meetings, or they just don't understand the process. And, in addition to that, there's people who might just want to move into the community who don't have a voice at all because, they want to be there, but are not yet a member. So for me, I find that this process is, it is kind of idealistic in how it wants to be democratic, but often isn't. And because of that, I think that understanding the process really informs how I vote for city council members. It informs how I pay attention on social media and like in community board newsletters and things like that as to what's actually going on in my neighborhood. And then knowing what the actual process is, if I actually really care about a development that might be going up in my neighborhood, then it enables me to have a seat at the table for issues that really matter to me. I think you're on mute, Bobbi.
Classic. Dan, do you want to weigh in on this question? Why should we care? Why is this important? Anything to add to what Jesse's already said?
I mean, Jesse made some great points, and I just want to bring it back to the fact that we have a housing shortage. Like, that's the root of all of this. That's why we all do this work, is because we don't, there just physically are not enough homes in New York City to house all the people who would like to live here at a price that ordinary people can afford. And so we need to build more. And the ULURP process, as flawed as it is the way right now is the way that we kind of get that done. So if you want to build more housing in New York, you got to understand ULURP. And if you want to build a better process for housing in New York, which I think we should, then you have to understand the current process and kind of who the players are, what they see as their role, what they get out of this process, and kind of make a case to them about how we can do better as a city to allow more housing by right and to make it easier and faster to move through this process so that building more housing is more affordable and easier.
Hear to that. Austin, what do you have to say?
I mean, most everything has been said. I think the one thing that I would definitely add on is that by and large, developers and projects that go through ULURP all have the commonality that they have a great deal of potential in either their current form or this form that they're applying with or the form that they end up with. They are projects that deal with a great deal of affordable housing. They all have some percentage of affordable housing. That's the key requirement. If they're applying for an upzoning, they would have to have affordable housing. That's how it works with the mandatory inclusionary housing program. And even when it comes to projects that might not be in the best locations for housing, like say there's a project going up in Harlem right now that's going through the ULURP process. It's just about to wrap it up. And there are very legitimate critiques to be made about this project and others like it. It's a lot of market rate units in a working class area, not enough affordable units. But I think the one thing that people have to understand is that even if the project that goes through ULURP may not be great, it is better than whatever could be built as of right, because any project that's built as of right, you do not get that engagement. You do not get that public process. It just goes through no process, no requirements, more often than not, no affordable housing. So even if, say, 145 is the project in question, it's not perfect. I would definitely say it's definitely got a lot of flaws and needs a lot of alterations to make it a good project. But the project that went through it, got the application, is far better than anything that could be built as of right. And when a developer goes through the ULURP process, they have the knowledge that more likely than not, there are going to be changes made. And they're opening themselves up to this process. And engaging with ULURP process allows you to express support or any ideas of alterations or specific changes that you want to see made that could better suit the project at hand. More often than not, these tweaks are going to be small, but those small tweaks can certainly add up and go a long way. And especially when it comes to all of these projects are going to have affordable housing, and they're better than the smaller as of right projects. When Olnick pulled the plug, what's going to be built there is going to be all market rate housing pretty much. There's going to be no affordable housing. 960 Franklin Avenue, a project that I mentioned earlier, had 789 market rate units, but it also had 789 affordable units. When it was cut from the plan and rejected, those 789 affordable units were pretty much gutted. There's no affordable units or below market rate units in the as of right plan. I believe it's 500 market rate units, 500 more expensive market rate units. And sure, taller buildings, they might not always be the most attractive. They might not always be the most beautiful thing in the world. But as I pointed out earlier, they have potential. All these projects have potential. And even if it's not outright support saying, hey, I see where this is going. I like the steps that we've taken. I think we should do X, Y, and Z to change it. Our ability to say, voice that we think this is a step in the right direction and something that is badly needed in this process, because I personally think that there's not enough understanding that part of this housing crisis is a supply crisis. It is also most certainly a crisis about the depth of affordability, the number of affordable apartments, but an as of right plan more often than not would be significantly worse than even the most basic or the first iteration of a project that goes through ULURP. And even if you don't particularly like how a project goes in as it enters, understand that it could be a lot worse. And because they're entering ULURP, you are given the opportunity to say, hey, I'm given the opportunity to engage with that project, to engage with that developer, and engage with that process. And the voices of people, the voices of pro-housing people are needed in this process desperately.
That is a great way to close. Hopefully we'll be seeing a inclusionary housing session where we talk a little bit more about that, but it's certainly an important part of any residential rezoning, talking about inclusionary for affordability. So in closing, I'm gonna make a call out to folks who are watching. If you are not already following us on social media, we are Open New York. You can find us at OpenNY for FOR, all on Instagram and Twitter. You can visit our website at opennewyork.city and feel free to reach out, engage with us on this topic and others. And a sincere thank you for tuning in.